Well, folks, we are here live as Iran has now launched a massive missile barrage toward Israel. Up to 450 missiles launched from Iranian territory at Israel. They're being shot down all over the state of Israel, ranging from Jerusalem to Tel Aviv, from the north to the south in Ashdod. The video is fairly astonishing. Again, Israel is an extraordinarily technologically capable state. So far, there are no casualties reported despite this extraordinarily large missile barrage that is all over the heads of civilians. I mean, I am texting with friends right now in Israel as we speak. You'll see me probably do it during this particular broadcast, finding out if they're okay. People are hiding in their mamads. That is a safe room that people have in their homes. People are hiding in essentially bomb shelters, places like malls, places in their buildings. And they've been instructed by the Israel spokesperson, the IDF spokesperson, to be vigilant and act exactly according to the instructions of the Home Front Command. Some of the video, again, is pretty amazing. Here is some of the video of missiles dropping near Tel Aviv. These bright flashes that you're seeing in the sky are Iranian missiles.
Okay, okay, guys, we got to get off the roof. These are coming down right next to us here.
You can see there's some impacts. Those impacts mostly are happening in non-populated areas. Israel has two separate shoot-down systems. They have the Iron Dome, which is meant mostly for short-range rockets. And then they also have something called David's Sling, which is a longer-range anti-missile system. You can see some more video of the missiles coming down, as well as sirens that are ringing throughout Israel. There was a fair bit of warning here, so virtually all of the population is underground or in their safe rooms at this point. They have been since about 5 p.m. local time. The missiles started actually dropping in Israel around 6 p.m., 6:15 p.m. local time, which is about 7 hours ahead of the East Coast. So at this point, they've been dropping in Israel for the better part of an hour and a half. That was the first barrage of missiles. There's going to be a second barrage of missiles, apparently, that will be launched as well. Iran, of course, announcing that this is in retaliation for the death of Hassan Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, which is the Iranian terror proxy group in Lebanon, which has been absolutely devastated by the Israeli Air Force and the IDF. The IDF, of course, yesterday went into southern Lebanon in an incursion in an attempt to clear out tunnels and terror cells in southern Lebanon that were intending to perform a second October 7th, this time on the northern border. We're still awaiting what Israel's response will be. Senior officials in Israel say it will be severe. This is not going to be like the last round where Iran fired some 300 cruise missiles and drones at Israel, and then Israel responded with a sort of pinpoint attack demonstrating technological capability. There will be a much heavier response. We'll get to that in a little bit, what that response could be. Here's some more video of the missiles coming down, and you can hear the sirens in the streets, obviously. You hear the voice of children, obviously. And these are coming over populated areas. And despite Iran trying to pretend that these are military strikes, these are not, in fact, military strikes. They do not have the capacity to actually launch at specifically military areas. These are all flying directly over civilian areas. Here is some of the footage of the impact in southern Israel. You can see this large barrage. Again, when a large barrage falls to the ground like that, it's a fairly safe assumption that that is an open area, considering that, again, Israel has pretty sophisticated anti-missile defenses at this point. Over the Western Wall, the Wailing Wall, Israelis were told, despite the fact that it is one of the holiest seasons of the year, we are going into Rosh Hashanah as an Orthodox Jew, very often late at night, you are saying what are called salichot, which are extra prayers that you say. All those were canceled. Mass gatherings were canceled earlier today. Here are some interceptions over the Kotel in Jerusalem. And just remember that for all the talk about how Iran cares deeply about the Palestinian population, these missiles are also over East Jerusalem, which is almost entirely Palestinian. And of course, anything that's above the Western Wall is also above the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And I'm getting all sorts of these sorts of videos from my friends in Israel who right now are in their shelters and are just basically aiming their camera at the sky and seeing the exact same thing. President Biden has put out a statement. It says, this morning, the vice president and I convened our national security team to discuss Iranian plans to launch an imminent missile attack against Israel. We discussed how the United States is prepared to help defend Israel against these attacks and protect American personnel in the region. Well, that is about as lukewarm a statement as I've ever heard. I mean, that really does not give us a lot of information other than Kamala Harris is apparently the acting president of the United States. Now would be an excellent time for the United States to make clear that they're going to back whatever play Israel makes to take out the giant terror state that is Iran. Not that the United States needs to go to direct war with Iran. Nobody's interested in that, but they simply will not get in the way. They've been slow walking aid to the Israelis in the middle of all of this. Israel, again, has already said that they are not going to go quietly after this one. President Trump put out a statement on Truth Social as well. Said, look at the world today. Look at the missiles flying right now in the Middle East. Look at what's happening with Russia, Ukraine. Look at inflation destroying the world. None of this happened while I was president. And of course, he is totally correct about that. If the former president of the United States had remained the current president of the United States, the Abraham Accords would have been signed long ago. Now, meanwhile, what is Israel going to do in retaliation? Well, my guess is they're going to do something pretty severe. There are a couple of different options that are on the table from what I hear. And again, I'm not hearing anything that is specifically classified or anything like that, but these options have been widely discussed in the Israeli press as well as by Israeli officials. Option number one is striking at Iran's nuclear facilities. Iran, of course, has been in the business of developing a nuclear weapon for the better part of 20 years. They are apparently at threshold levels of uranium development. If Iran were to go nuclear, that would totally change the math in the Middle East, simply because, as you can see, there's great willingness by the Iranians to use ballistic nuclear technology. They could possibly fire a ballistic missile at Israel tipped with a nuclear weapon. And that, of course, would be an existential threat to the state of Israel. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has made this the centerpiece of his campaign against Iran for the better part of his entire career. And so the severe possibility exists here that Israel will go and attempt to blow up or take out nuclear facilities in Iran. The other thing that would be much easier for them to do militarily speaking, because the nuclear facilities are largely underground. Some of them have been hardened. Now, again, is that going to stop Israel? Well, the place where they killed Hassan Nasrallah was also 60 meters underground and was hardened. And apparently Nasrallah simply died from the pressure of the bomb blast. So could Israel do something similar in Iran? Possible. We don't know the Israeli capacity to use bunker busters, for example, to go after, say, the Natanz nuclear facility. However, the easier move would be to go after the Iranian oil and gas fields. Here is a map of the Iranian oil and gas fields. If you take a look at where this is on the map, you'll notice that this is in western Iran, right? This is just the other side of the border with Iraq. So that makes it much more close territorially to Israel than if they were located on the other side of the country. Obviously, if Israel were to strike at those oil fields, it would basically throttle the Iranian economy completely. It would lead to the significant possibility of some sort of actual internal revolution inside Iran because they simply would have no money coming in. The only working industry that Iran has at this point is the oil and natural gas industry. By Israel blowing those up, they would effectively be imposing by military force what the Biden administration has refused to do through economic sanctions. So, meanwhile, while all this is happening, there was a major shooting attack in Tel Aviv. It was actually on the Tel Aviv is a series of cities, actually. The main center of Tel Aviv is Tel Aviv. You go a little bit south, then you get into Jaffa. In Jaffa, there was a major shooting attack. This is just before the missiles launched. Apparently, up to 10 people have been killed. 2 terrorists walked off the light train there and just started shooting everybody in sight. There's a massacre on the street. Here's a little bit of what that video looked like. You can see the bodies lining the streets here. The terrorists were killed on sight. There were rumors of a second terror attack. Apparently, that has not happened as of yet. There's a rumor that perhaps another hotel in Herzliya, which again is located just outside of kind of traditional Tel Aviv, that there was an attack happening there. That apparently has not happened. According to the IDF, there were no casualties in that heavy Iranian barrage. And there is, in fact, footage that we are gathering right now of the remains of an Iranian missile near Susia. I would recommend, by the way, that if you want more footage and more real-time updates, that you check out Amit Segal. Amit Segal is one of the best reporters in Israel. You can go to his Telegram. He does have a Telegram account in English. He also has one in Hebrew that you can pay to have translated as well. A Palestinian was killed in Jericho because, again, as Saddam Hussein once said when he was firing cruise missiles at Israel, he doesn't separate beans from beans. This idea that the Iranians care deeply about the Palestinians is a lie. They just see them as a weapon to destroy the Israelis, the Zionists, whatever they wish to call them. That day, several were injured by shrapnel from an Iranian missile. Again, the Iranians do not have the exactitude necessary to simply strike at military sites, nor do they really have the interest. The skies of Ramallah have also been covered in missiles as well. Iran apparently launched a simultaneous launch from the Tabriz area. You can assume that any area from which there was a massive launch will be the target of some sort of Israeli retaliatory response at this point. The refugee camp in Nablus, which is a major city, it's not a refugee camp, it's a major Palestinian city. That Palestinian city also, there's footage of rockets flying over there as well, demonstrating once again that when it comes to the Iranian terror regime, their proxies, other terrorist groups in the region, they do not care about civilians. They don't care if they're Palestinian. They don't care if they're Israeli Arab. They don't care if they're Israeli Jew. They don't care about any of that. All they care about is putting pressure on the state of Israel and avoiding the humiliation of the fact that Israel has thoroughly clocked two of their greatest assets in the region, Hamas and Hezbollah. That is the current state of affairs right now. We're bringing you real-time updates, obviously, as we receive them. There's also a White House press briefing that is going to start in fairly short order. You can see the screen of Tel Aviv here as well. We have Tel Aviv and Jerusalem live feeds. So you can see right now things are fairly quiet. There's expected to be a second round of major missile attack on Jerusalem, on Tel Aviv. And the extent to which Israel has prepared itself for attacks like this is truly an astonishing thing. The suggestion that you would have 500 missiles dropping at one time onto Israel without any significant damage done on the ground is almost unthinkable. Again, 450 ballistic missiles launched at Israel. Most of them were intercepted. No serious injuries in Israel. Citizens have been asked to stay in the shelters at this point. So that is the latest. And again, this is a real risk for Iran. Iran was stuck between a rock and a hard place. Effectively speaking, if they had not responded to Israel completely destroying and decimating the upper echelons of Hezbollah, going into southern Lebanon and wiping out the remaining Hezbollah forces, Iran would have lost all regional influence and regional sway. If they go too hard at Israel, and this looks like too hard, then Israel is going to retaliate in kind or more so. The IDF has now announced the citizens can leave their shelters throughout the country. They don't see any more launches from Iran at this time. Apparently, that is just breaking. So we'll see if there's a second round again. There have been rumors that there would be a second round, but Iran, of course, is suggesting that they will up the ante again if Israel responds. Now, the chances that Israel does not respond are effectively zero. Israel is not going to listen to Joe Biden anymore. When the Biden-Harris administration suggested that Israel, quote unquote, take the win in the aftermath of the last round of massive missile attacks, Israel instead fired effectively a very new technology at the Iranian territory. They hit a target that was just outside one of the nuclear facilities, a sort of an intimidation move. But this time, Israel is not going to sit still. There's great unity on both sides of the Israeli aisle, the left to the right, the Labor Party all the way over to Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir. There's great unity in Israel for the possibility of doing severe damage to the Iranian regime's economic capabilities and nuclear capabilities. Those, of course, are the real levers. And because Israel doesn't have the power to topple the Iranian regime, the big problem in Iran, of course, is that the population of Iran, pardon me, the population of Iran is very much against the Iranian regime. You've seen the videos, we played them on the show, of Iranians refusing to stomp on the Israeli flag or burn the Israeli flag, for instance, despite the Iranian regime encouraging them to do so. The problem, of course, is that the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps is a supremely corrupt, paid and bought and paid for operation by the Ayatollah Khamenei. Now, Israel does have significant intelligence on the ground in Iran. We reported on the show today, for example, that the former president of Iran, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, dramatically evil anti-Semite, he had even suggested that within Iran, they had launched a full-scale mole hunt for Mossad agents throughout the government of Iran. They put together a special task force to do it, and it turns out that the head of the Iran Mossad mole hunt was himself Mossad. Israel has tremendous levels of intelligence penetration in Iran, so there will be operations in response. The IDF, I'm sure, is going to be holding some sort of press conference very shortly to explain what exactly is happening. Israeli airspace was closed for a grand total of half an hour over all of this. Israeli airspace, Ben Gurion Airport, are going to reopen momentarily, apparently, as well. People exiting their shelters, people going back to their daily lives. And it is worth noting here because, again, it is rather astonishing at how people live under fire like this. I was calling up friends as the missiles were falling, called up a close friend in Jerusalem, and his first remark was, "This is so annoying. I was just getting out of the shower." And that is how people live over there, and people are used to this level of tension. They go about their daily lives. They continue to live. The IDF spokesman says there were a few injuries. He says there will be consequences for this event. Amichai Shikli, who's a member of the Israeli parliament, he tweeted out in Persian, "Big mistake," which, again, there are members, I've been told, of senior officials who suggest that there is going to be a severe retaliation for all of this. The IDF says, again, That following situational assessment, it was decided it's now permitted to leave the protected spaces in all areas across the country, but they will continue to follow the Home Front Command's guidelines. The IDF also said that the shooting will have consequences. They don't detect any additional threats. Now, again, very high chance that that shooting that happened in Jaffa was in fact coordinated with the rocket launch, that just as the rockets were going off, just as the sirens were sounding, terrorists were unleashed by Iran in an attempt to shoot as many Jews as possible. And in that particular attack, we are looking at double digits dead, and there will presumably be a response. Again, the numbers are still coming in. It's unclear exactly how many ballistic missiles have been fired. I'm hearing anywhere from 150 ballistic missiles, according to the Times of Israel, to 450 ballistic missiles fired at Israel. Sirens sounded all the way across the country. Now, the White House did say that President Biden has directed the U.S. military to aid Israel's defense against the Iranian attacks and shoot down the missiles. Presumably, that will be paired with the same sort of utter nonsense you hear from the Biden-Harris administration on a regular basis about how Israel should take the win and calm down and what's the big deal. Well, very unlikely that Israel is going to, quote unquote, take the win in the face of, again, a massive barrage from foreign soil. There's no other way to put this. This is a direct act of war. Obviously, this is the second act of war in the last 6 months directly by Iran. The fact that Iran has been forced to fire ordnance from its own state into Israel demonstrates the weakness of their current position. Typically, Iran would use its proxies. It would activate Hamas in order to perform October 7th, or to activate Hezbollah on October 8th to fire rockets into northern Israel. Because Israel has so wildly degraded the power of those proxy groups, Iran has been forced now twice in the last 6 months to fire direct ordnance from its home territory into Israel. And Israel's been preparing for this for absolutely years. Again, all of this is coming amid new evidence that Hezbollah was ready to invade en masse after October 7th. According to the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, this is the Times of Israel reporting, the army revealed that 3,000 terrorists were in position to storm the Galilee. The Galilee is the northern part of Israel. Strikes drove them away, and commandos then carried out 70 forays into Lebanon to seize weapons. So they were ready to go, even in recent days. The IDF briefed reporters on the new information before IDF spokesperson Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari held a briefing in Hebrew and English, presenting images and maps from the foiled mass invasion plan and elaborating on the subsequent covert commando missions in southern Lebanon. So that was, again, immediately upon October 7th. Apparently, there were some 2,400 Radwan terrorists and another 500 Palestinian Islamic Jihad terrorists trained by Radwan who had been waiting in southern Lebanon villages to attack Israel in the days after Hamas carried out the October 7th attacks. Their plan, they found maps showing what they were planning to, quote unquote, occupy in the Galilee. The Northern Command at the time expected an invasion from Lebanon. They'd bolstered their defenses. And then they ended up carrying out a bunch of strikes on Hezbollah operatives in targeted fashion at the time. Again, we are bringing you live updates from another massive missile barrage that was launched against Israel by Iran right now. And I'm bringing you as much data as I can in real time. And there are a couple of feeds that I recommend, Amit Segal's being one of them. Apparently, the IDF again updating, they say that there were several individual falls of particular missiles, but no casualties. And apparently, the shooting this evening from Iran was broader than it had been in the past. We're still awaiting word from the White House. You would assume that the White House is going to try to call for some level of calm, of course. I want to show you again some of the footage of the missiles that have been coming down. Here's an image of some of the missiles. There's 4. There's the image of some of the missiles that fell. You can see what that looked like. You can also see what one of the missiles looks like after it hit, and it is enormous. I mean, these are large ordnance weapons. These are not small weapons at all. There's a video of one of the missiles that traveled all the way from Iran just to fall without harm in Israel. We also have more footage of the shooters exiting the train. These are the shooters in Jaffa who apparently have killed 10 people. Unclear from where they came. In Israel, of course, is 20% Israeli Arab, lives cheek by jowl with large Palestinian areas. These could have been people who transited over from the West Bank. They could be like-minded Israeli Arabs, although that's rarer. We'll find out their identities in the near future, obviously. Here's some raw footage of Iranian missiles raining over the old city of Jerusalem. Of course, there's a holy site for all religions, Muslims, Christians, as well as Jews. is taken from the Kotel Plaza. The biggest sortie of missiles fired from Iran so far in this war. Meanwhile, according to the Wall Street Journal, Israeli paramedics have been deployed to search several sites where reports of rocket strikes have been received, according to Magen David Adom, that is the Israeli Red Cross. MDA says there are currently no reports of injuries from the fire toward Israel, except for 2 light injuries from shrapnel in the Tel Aviv area and some injuries and anxiety from people who are trying to run to the shelters. The White House says that President Biden met Tuesday morning with the national security team. According to the White House statement, they reviewed the status of U.S. preparations to help Israel defend against these attacks and protect U.S. personnel in the region. So all of this is a way of Iran attempting to signal that it does have the capacity to do Israel serious damage. Now, when you fire this many missiles at a sovereign state, it's easy to say, as I'm sure the media will, that there was no real risk, that it was all pre-planned. It was never meant to do any harm. If you are going to fire that many missiles at a sovereign nation, you, of course, have to assume that there will be casualties. The goal would be casualties. Iranian incompetence does not mean Iranian decent intent. Hard to imagine a more obvious act of war than what has currently occurred. When people say that Israel is, quote unquote, escalating the war, understand this war has been escalated since October 7th. Israel's in a 7-front war currently with Iranian proxy groups and Iran directly, ranging from the Houthis in Yemen in the south to Hamas in Israel's south to the West Bank, where Iranian proxy groups have been trying to perform attacks, to southern Lebanon with Hezbollah, to Iraq, to Syria, and to Iran directly. Again, what you're watching here is footage from Jaffa, which is a major city in Israel. It's near Tel Aviv, where terrorists exited the light train and proceeded to open fire on civilians. This is a declaration of war by Iran, obviously. And Israel is not going to stop short. Noah Rothman, who writes for National Review, he correctly says, Biden's fear of escalation is what begets escalation. That is exactly right. Again, if Joe Biden had made it clear that the United States was basically going to say, Israel's going to do what it wants to do, we got no say, they're going to do what they want to do, Iran probably wouldn't have done this in the first place. But this is a badly played hand. Iran is making a very bad move. If Israel leaves the nuclear facilities in Iran intact, it will be a grave strategic error. A grave strategic error. Senior Israeli officials again saying there will be a quote-unquote extreme reaction to this attack. Now, meanwhile, other media networks like CNN has turned over its coverage apparently to the execrable Christiane Amanpour, who's effectively an apologist for Iranian terror regime. She always has been. She's radically anti-Israel, radically pro-terror regimes in the Middle East. The possibility that Israel holds back this time, basically nil. According to other sources, Israel, Jordan, and Iraq have now closed their airspaces, the perfect path for Israeli aircraft headed to Iran. So Israel had already suggested that unlike back in April when Iran fired this first barrage of missiles, Israel's response will not depend on the level of casualties suffered. They were announcing that before they found out how many casualties had been suffered, because nobody should have to even risk all of this. At this point, it is worth reminding everybody that the Biden National Security Advisor said 1 year ago that the Middle East is quieter today than it has been in 2 decades. Yes, it was, actually. I just want to show you a map of what it looked like when the red alerts went off across Israel. So there is an app. It's called Red Alert, and it lights up on your phone when there is a missile overhead. And here is that map. Here's what that map looked like in Israel when it lit up. I mean, it really is insane. This is 5. You can see the map of Israel with the red alerts. The entire country. I mean, the entire country just lit up with red alerts. Miraculous that nobody was hurt in a serious fashion or killed in this missile attack, obviously. Meanwhile, again, here is Israeli Minister Amichai Shikli, who I mentioned before. Here's his tweet in Persian saying, big mistake. That is indubitably correct. Again, we're still awaiting some sort of word from the White House. But the notion that the Israelis are listening to the Americans at this point is ridiculous. They're not going to preemptively surrender to Iran this time. And we are showing you now the live view of Tel Aviv. You can see the skies are clear. No missiles falling right now. Let's just suggest that if that map, that red alert map, happened, say, in the state of New York or Florida, the country that did it would not exist the next day. So they actually went after, apparently, the West Bank as well, which is pretty incredible, by the way. Here is there's another map that I have been provided from Red Alert, a more recent map provided by Red Alert. I'm going to have my team pull it right now. And you can see. Now, why does that matter? Why does that matter? Well, because the West Bank is largely Palestinian. About 2 million Palestinians live in the West Bank compared to about 500,000 Jews. And the map that we showed before was basically clear in the West Bank, meaning that the Iranians were presumably trying to target Jewish populations or populations inside the so-called Green Line. That was no longer the case by the end of the missile barrage. By the end of the missile barrage, the entire map is covered in red dots because that is again, the Iranians do not care how many Palestinians die. They are perfectly willing for Palestinians to die. They're perfectly willing for Arabs to die. Now, again, Iran is trying to claim that they were aiming at 3 Air Force bases. Well, if so, bad aim. Bad aim. We'll see how quickly we can pull that map, because until you see it, you really don't believe it. It's basically the entire map of Israel covered in red dots. Those would be places where the red alert went off. Certain politicians globally are saying the right things. One of the best politicians on planet Earth, Geert Wilders, over in the Netherlands, he tweeted out, "Stay safe, Israel. We love you." Apparently, there were reports of celebrations in Gaza as well. So the Gazan population has not learned the lesson that when you support terrorism, it doesn't go well for you. They were out there partying while all of this was falling. There's also the possibility of a targeted strike against Ayatollah Khamenei. He has been in hiding since the killing of Hassan Nasrallah. If he were to be killed, there is no great chain of command in Iran. Again, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps is a giant terror organization. They do have an internal infrastructure. It would take somebody inside the IRGC probably leading a revolt in order to overthrow the government of Iran. With that said, Israeli officials are now saying that Israel's response to the Iranian missile attack will, quote, be unlike anything we've known until now. That's according to official outlets. So, everybody who's a friend of Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib should pray for all of their friends, because those friends are going to do quite badly in the Middle East over the course of the next few hours. So, Iran was more successful this time. They are more successful this time in actually getting the missiles from their own territory into other people's territory. Last time they did this, half of them actually didn't rain on Israel. Half of them rained down on Iran. But, again, there's going to be a claim that is now made. It's being retailed by people like Ian Bremmer. Again, I've had Ian on the show. Sometimes his takes are good. This is a particularly bad take. He says, looks like next to no casualties from Iranian strikes on Israel, telegraphed significantly in advance to the Americans. Iran hoping to reestablish the minimal level of deterrence while avoiding escalation. You don't avoid escalation by shooting 450 ballistic missiles at your neighbor. That's a ridiculous take. A totally ridiculous take. And the White House says that Vice President Harris and President Biden, presumably the real President Joe, are monitoring the Iranian attack against Israel from the White House Situation Room. And to his credit, President Biden directed the U.S. military to aid Israel's defense against Iranian attacks and shoot down missiles that were targeting Israel. Meanwhile, parents are finally exiting these safe rooms where they were gathered with their children, reading them books and showing them movies as the sirens went off. It is just astonishing that a modern Western state, Israel is a modern Western state, is forced to undergo this at the hands of a terror regime that has been handed billions of dollars by the United States and its allies. We now have news on the 2 terrorists who launched this mass attack, this mass casualty attack in Jaffa. Apparently, they were Palestinians from Hebron, which is Hebron. Security forces did kill both of them. So they were from the West Bank. They were coming from an area that is particularly radicalized. Again, if you haven't been following, we're bringing you continuous updates on the mass attack on the state of Israel from the terror republic of Iran. A senior Pentagon official trying to forestall Israeli action has now told Sky News in Arabic Tehran informed international officials about the size and timing of the expected attack on Israel. That doesn't change one thing. It does not change one thing. Simply announcing to the Americans that you're going to, just shoot a few missiles at Israel does not make it not a crime, does not make it not an act of terror. It is a fool's errand. They're playing the same game that Hassan Nasrallah was playing just before his head imploded. It turns out that if you continue to think that you can tug on Superman's cape, so to speak, and spit into the wind, in the words of Jim Croce, tug the mask on that old Lone Ranger, well, you don't mess around with the Israeli Air Force. That is a very, very bad idea. And this bizarre notion that you can continue to push and push and push and push, and Israel will just not respond in kind because the Americans will hold them back. Those days have now ended. That is not a thing that is going to happen. Again, Jordan and Iraq have now closed their airspace. Israeli aircraft are almost undoubtedly headed to Iran. Dan Senor, who reports for the region, another great podcast people should give a listen to, Call Me Back podcast. He does an excellent job with that. He says, it appears the U.S. had more firepower deployed in the region today than it had back in April in anticipation of the April Iranian strike against Israel. So there was preparation for all this. Again, the video is astonishing. Look at the video of these rockets falling in Israel. The Islamic Republic is still pretending this is a first wave. But again, Home Front Command in Israel would not be telling people they could leave their bomb shelters unless they were fairly certain that they were done, at least for the moment. You can see all of these hitting, many of them hitting in the sea. By the way, these are people on the beach who are just filming all of these rockets falling into the sea. Again, the big reminder here is that if Iran actually had nuclear weapons, this would be a very, very different conversation we're having right now, which is presumably why you're going to see in the very near future an attempt by Israel to destroy the Iranian nuclear weapons centers. Again, that casualty count in the Jaffa shooting that was coincident with the missile attack is now up to 8. In Beirut, people are firing fireworks as well. Well, we'll see how that goes for them. Apparently, there's some people who have not yet found out the lesson of FAFO. So there's been some talk in Israel about what to do with families of terror members in the West Bank, the possibility of deporting them to places like Gaza. Pretty spectacular footage of what was happening in Israel just moments ago. Again, you can call, if you have friends in Israel, you can call them up. You can hear the sirens on the phone. It is amazing that people live like this. Here is the new map. I mentioned earlier that there's an updated map of what these missile strikes looked like, what the red alerts looked like. And that map is the entirety of the territory of the state of Israel, except for the north, because there are no people in the north. It's basically been depopulated. So, by the way, some of these are hitting inside the Gaza Strip. I mean, you can actually look at the map and you can see fairly close up that some of these red alerts are going off in the Gaza Strip, which is kind of incredible. Iran did issue a statement in response to the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh, who is the political leader of Hamas, Hassan Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah, and Abbas Nilfroshan, who is an Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps member, I believe. We attacked military bases in Israel with dozens of missiles. If Israel reacts, we'll strike with force. Well, I mean, what would you just call it? What just happened? And Israel will, of course, react. So meanwhile, CNN's Arlette Sains is apparently declaring that the Biden-Harris administration is in control of the situation in the Middle East. Okay, we'll find out about that. Apparently, Iranian media are still saying this was just the first wave, so we're awaiting the possibility that there will be a second wave. That apparently is not the case at this exact time. We have yet to hear anything directly from the vice president, and we have yet to hear directly from the vice president of the United States and the current Democratic presidential candidate. Just a few vague statements. We are still waiting to hear from the president of the United States as well. The Israeli government is making clear that this is not going to go without an answer. People, by the way, who are arguing that because no one died, Israel should not respond. It's like saying if someone comes into your house and tries to stab you and they fail, then you should probably let them go. And once again, the only confirmed casualty from the Iranian missile attack is a Palestinian man from a West Bank village near Jericho who was killed, according to Avi Meir, when missile fragments fell on him following their interception. Presumably, Israel is already in the air. So, there was an earlier report, by the way, of a possibility of terrorists in another hotel in the city of Herzliya. That turned out not to be true. Again, just to rewind, so people know the timeline here. Iran had earlier attacked Israel after Israel killed killed Ismail Haniyeh, who's the political head of Hamas. They had killed Haniyeh. Iran responded by then firing off 300 drones and missiles at the state of Israel. Israel shot down virtually all of them, or they dropped into Iranian territory. Israel then proceeded to, over the course of the last 2.5 weeks, completely eviscerate the forward operating base for Iran in the region. That would be Hezbollah, in the most spectacular military operation, perhaps of our lifetimes, completely eviscerating and destroying the upper echelons of Hezbollah. Because Israel, just within the last 48 hours, has now unleashed troops in southern Lebanon to perform specific operations. They have not lost anyone in southern Lebanon, thank God, so far. Hezbollah, by the way, did, at the same time that Iran was launching missiles, launch a barrage of Fadi 4 missiles at the Sde Dov air base located on the outskirts of Tel Aviv. It then proceeded to land in the ocean. So, again, the lack of success by Israel's enemies does not mean that Israel's enemies are somehow harmless. Apparently, Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, he's the defense minister in Israel, spoke with the American Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin. The two apparently discussed Iran's intentions to attack Israel, the military cooperation for joint defense, and the right of the state of Israel to defend itself and act against its enemies, which is a very interesting readout. Again, the idea there being that Israel is not going to sit still. Again, I'm waiting for the moment when apparently the Biden administration tries to call for some level of restraint from Israel, just waiting for it, because that has been their habit throughout this war. Perhaps because they realize Israel isn't going to do it, they're not going to call for it. So, yeah, again, why is Iran coordinating these attacks? Why is Iran warning of these attacks in advance? Presumably because they're still playing the same stupid game. Now, Peter Zeihan, who's a geopolitical analyst, he's been suggesting, again, that there's a lot of pre-coordination of these attacks. Yes, and the idea here is that Israel will be deterred from further action by an attack like this as a game of tit for tat. As Israel's attacks on Hezbollah have shown, the game of tit for tat is now over. Israel is tired of this. Israel is no longer going to allow its population to live underground on a semi-permanent basis, nor are they going to live under the imminent threat of Iranian nuclear weapon. And so any attempts to pre-coordinate this in the hopes that would buy off the Israeli military, very, very, very unlikely at this point in time. And for those just joining us, about try and figure out the time change here. About an hour and a half ago, 2 hours ago, these missile attacks started. President Trump has now issued a statement, quote, "The world is on fire and spiraling out of control. We have no leadership and no one running the country. We have a non-existent president in Joe Biden and a completely absent Vice President Kamala Harris, who's too busy fundraising in San Francisco, a city which she and Gavin Newsom totally destroyed, and staging fake photo ops. No one is in charge. It's not even clear who is more confused, Biden or Kamala. Neither has any idea what is even going on. When I was president, Iran was in total check. They were starved for cash, fully contained, desperate to make a deal. Kamala flooded them with American cash, and ever since, they've been exporting terror all over, unraveling the Middle East. Under President Trump, we had no war in the Middle East, no war in Europe, harmony in Asia, no inflation, no Afghanistan catastrophe. Instead, we had peace. Now, war or the threat of war is raging everywhere, and the two incompetents running this country are leading us to the brink of World War III. You wouldn't trust Joe or Kamala to run a lemonade stand, let alone the free world. It is no surprise Iran desperately wants Kamala Harris to be president. They know as long as she's in power, they can take advantage of America. That is why they've tried to target me. By the way, that part is 100% true. Iran clearly is begging for a Kamala Harris presidency. There's a reason that Iran hacked the file on J.D. Vance. There's a reason that Iran has been projecting its attempts to assassinate President Trump. Iran desperately wants Kamala Harris to be president of the United States. They want advisors like Phil Gordon in the White House and Ben Rhodes in the White House telling the West and telling the American regime that the Biden-Harris administration, or that the Harris administration, should put the kibosh on Israeli ability to defend itself. Iran is begging for Kamala Harris. Trump says, if I was in charge, October 7th never happens. Russia-Ukraine never happens. Afghanistan botched withdrawal never happens. Inflation never happens. If I win, we'll have peace in the world again. If Kamala gets 4 more years, the world goes up in smoke. And that, of course, is correct. The price of crude oil has jumped on the expectation, presumably, that Israel is going to act against, you would imagine, the oil fields in Iran, which, of course, is something that they should do. And not all that many points of leverage with regards to Iran. The oil fields are definitely one of them. Just checking the latest headlines at this point. Apparently, a Gazan worker who was staying in Jericho was the person killed by shrapnel from a missile. So it was a person who was illegally moving from Gaza to the West Bank and was killed by the shrapnel from that particular missile. We are still seeing the jump in the crude oil prices, by the way, is in fact fading a little bit. We'll see if it continues to grow. Celebratory gunfire is sounding in South Beirut as Iran attacks Israel. South Beirut is, of course, a Hezbollah stronghold. So there's an attempt to show some sort of solidarity with Hezbollah. Well, soon there will be a lot of members of the Iranian government who are showing solidarity with Hezbollah in hell. That is a very real possibility at this point. Apparently, people in central Israel have been told they should remain near bomb shelters just in case at this point. And Israel is waiting for a second round is the possibility. So, again, we'll have to see how all of this plays out. We're still awaiting a press conference that was supposed to happen from the White House a little while ago. It was delayed, presumably because of the current events that are happening right now. Again, the videos, if you haven't seen them, we'll play them again. The videos that are happening right now are absolutely incredible of these missiles falling across the state of Israel. The videos demonstrate just the extent of the level of the firing. Tons of firing. That's striking on the ground in Israel. It is amazing that more people were not killed. Apparently the number is 0, which is a testament to the incredible technological capacity of the Israeli government. This is why when President Trump says that he would like an Iron Dome in America, what he really means is just a missile defense system as sophisticated as the one that the Israelis have. It is a very, very sophisticated missile defense system. We also have Mike Pence, former Vice President of the United States, saying the U.S. Navy stands by to engage. There is a map of U.S. Navy assets in the Middle East, and as you can see, those naval assets are stacked up in the Mediterranean. There aren't a lot of assets in the Persian Gulf. The Persian Gulf would be the place that's closest to those Iranian oil fields, but we do have the WASP amphibious ready group in the Mediterranean Sea. We have the USS Bulkley, we have the USS Oak Hill, the USS New York, the USS Arleigh Burke. All of those are staffs in the Mediterranean Sea, as well as the USS Cole. Down in the Red Sea, which is an area that they've been fighting the Houthis, we have the USS Frank Peterson, the USS Michael Murphy, the USS Stockdale, the USS Spruance, and we have a bunch of ships in the Gulf of Oman as well. So the U.S. Navy is well positioned to provide support if necessary. Although, again, I think very unlikely that Israel is going to require support in whatever retaliatory attack they're about to unleash. We do have some video of the aftermath of the missiles hitting. Here's what it looked like. You can see some sites were, in fact, struck. Some damage was done because everybody was in the Mamad, the safe room, or underground. There were no human casualties, but damage, of course, was done, property damage. Meanwhile, here's some video of Palestinians doing what they very frequently do, rejoicing at the sight of human suffering, unfortunately. Here are Palestinians who are very excited in the Gaza Strip, chanting in favor of Iran. Again, if these are folks who wanted a better future, at some point they might want to stop siding with Iranian terrorists and Iranian terror proxies. Meanwhile, a missile apparently has allegedly landed in Jordan as well. Here's what that missile looks like. And these are large ordnance. I mean, these are not small weapons. This one landed in Jordan. Jordan, of course, is not a country at war with Iran at the moment. Now, as you can imagine, the squad is particularly upset about everything that is happening. We await their statements of angst and dismay that this terror attack failed from Iran. Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, who is the Ringo Starr of the squad, she tweeted, "Netanyahu's invasion of Lebanon is putting millions of people at risk, forcing thousands to be displaced and inciting a regional war. The escalating violence must end in Lebanon, in Gaza, across the region." Well, I have an easy way for that to happen. That'd be for Iran to stop spreading terrorism throughout the region. Not a giant shock that we are seeing all the usual suspects emerge to defend their terrorist friends. Meanwhile, Rashida Tlaib doing what she does and defending Jeremy Corbyn. She's retweeting Jeremy Corbyn, arch anti-Semite who is so anti-Semitic he was kicked out of the Labour Party in Britain. You have to be pretty anti-Semitic to do that. Jeremy Corbyn tweeted, "Israel's decision to send troops into Lebanon, a sovereign nation, is not a limited ground invasion. It is a limited ground operation. It's an invasion. Well, actually, no. It's a retaliatory response to southern Lebanon being used as a launching ground for rockets. The attempt by all fans of the Iranian terror regime to switch the arrow in terms of blame here is quite astonishing. Outgoing Congressman Jamal Bowman, who was defeated in a primary because he's awful, despite his roid rage press conferences, he tweeted, as Israel bombards Lebanon, countless American citizens are trapped with their lives endangered. Commercial flights are next to non-existent. State Department must recognize this and immediately begin evacuating U.S. citizens. And none of this is shock from Rashida Tlaib. Again, all of this comes amid an incredibly fraught election. This election is incredibly close. Exogenous circumstances do affect elections. The reality is that, as President Trump says, if he were the president, none of this ever would have happened. And pretty much everyone knows this. This is the awkward part for the Biden-Harris administration. Douglas Murray is going to join us live in just a few moments to discuss what's happening in Israel. Again, we are covering live the latest events from the mass missile barrage targeted at the state of Israel. We are waiting any sort of word from the IDF on the next stage of the combat. IDF has imposed a new closed military zone along the border with Lebanon as well. They closed these military zones to prevent civilians from getting in. Those are largely staging areas for further raids into Lebanese territory to finally, once and for all, break the Hezbollah stranglehold on southern Lebanon. Meanwhile, retired three-star U.S. Army General Keith Kellogg on Fox News, he says that he believes that Israel is going to, at this point, go in for the kill with the Iranian regime.
Netanyahu has basically said to the world, they said to the United States, we've given you repeated opportunities to bring this thing to a conclusion, to shut this down, and the world has turned another eye. They've said no. I think he's going for the kill. And what I mean by that, he's going to respond quite forcefully. And I think if I was Iran right now, I'd say I think where he'd probably end up going, he's going to make a real key shot. He's either going after nuclear facilities or he's going after the supreme leader. And that's going to set everything in motion for a much wider war in the Middle East. But I think they've just said, the Israelis have said, we're done with this, enough. The same thing they've done with Hezbollah, same thing they did with Hamas. And, you know, to be very candid with you, Sandra, you know, it's probably about time. This is time it needs to be brought to some type of conclusion. If we're not going to help them conclude it, then they're going to have to do it on their own. And that's probably what they're going to try and do.
And again, that last point where he says that Israel's going to conclude it on its own, of course, they're a state. They should have the ability to defend themselves. The idea that this is going to turn into a quote-unquote wider war. Wider than what? That is my big question here. Wider than what? Who's going to get in who hasn't already gotten in? Syria doesn't want in. Syria does not want to have a hostile Israel on their border, ready to take out large armed divisions. Iran's projective power is all ballistic missiles. They've lost their projective power in terms of immediate borders by losing Hamas and losing Hezbollah. So very difficult to see what they could do other than larger missile barrages like this one that has been unsuccessful thus far. So when people say it's going to broaden how, which countries are not involved that will become involved at this point? It's the reason why I sort of oppose many of the talking points that are being put out about how this is going to escalate into a larger war. How? I need an explanation of what that larger war looks like that has not already been unleashed at this point. Meanwhile, the German foreign minister, Annalena Baerbock, on Tuesday said she condemned the Iranian missile attack on Israel in the strongest possible terms, saying that Iran must stop the attack immediately. Baerbock said, we have urgently warned Iran about this dangerous escalation. Iran must stop the attack immediately. It's driving the region further to the brink of the abyss. Meanwhile, Antonio Guterres, the awful and terrible Secretary General of the United Nations, he put out a statement reading, I condemn the broadening of the Middle East conflict with escalation after escalation. This must stop. We absolutely need a ceasefire. Well, I mean, thanks for that, bud. And all these moron diplomats who go out there like, we need a ceasefire. Well, congratulations to you. I'm pretty sure that Israel would also like a ceasefire, not one that preserves the terrorist groups that are aiming weaponry at them. Meanwhile, the Associated Press, doing yeoman work on behalf of terrorists, they put out a headline. That headline is, quote, breaking. The Israeli military says Iran has fired missiles at Israel, and air raid sirens are sounding across the country. What do you mean says? What do you mean says Iran has fired? Like, everyone can see the missiles being launched and dropping. Absolute absurdity. Again, there's this misperception that the West has about the Middle East, which is that the way that things get done over there is with temporary peace agreements. There has never been a permanent, workable peace agreement that has emerged from diplomacy alone. The only durable peace agreements that have ever been achieved in the history of the Middle East are ones where either the parties were not at war in the first place, like the Abraham Accords, or ones where Israel beat the living hell out of its enemies so badly that basically the other side just gave up and decided that they'd rather sign a treaty than continue with warring. That would be Egypt and Jordan, who have both been taken off the table as Israeli enemies, even though they were the lead Israeli enemies from 1948 to 1973. It remains a symptom of insanity that people believe that the way that you actually solve problems with Iran is to talk with the Ayatollahs. Please name me a time when this has worked ever in human history. I'm still awaiting an answer on that one. Now, again, Palestinians in Hebron were actually picking up the rockets. There is footage of them picking up the rockets. We'll get that as soon as possible. It's somewhat funny, darkly funny that people are simply just going up to these fired pieces of ordnance and picking them up. But look at the kinetic imagery here of these missiles that have been falling near the state of Israel. Absolutely unbelievable. No state worth its salt should be forced to undergo anything remotely like this. And Democrats keep trying to appease Iran, and it keeps failing over and over and over. Remember that time Barack Obama tried to airlift billions of dollars in cash on pallets to Iran? Remember that? That did not work out particularly well. Marco Rubio tweeted, large-scale, not symbolic missile attack from Iranian regime against Israel. A large-scale Israeli retaliatory response inside Iran is certain to follow. That, of course, is correct. Meanwhile, again, the Israelis are apparently preparing some sort of serious response. People are out and about in Israel at this point. They have canceled the home defense alert. It is worth noting, Hen Mazig, another Twitter account, he points out, do you remember when the UN called for a ceasefire for Ramadan? Tomorrow night begins Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, and the high holidays, the holiest part of the Jewish year. Where are the calls for a ceasefire now as the Islamic Republic in Iran prepares to attack Israel? This would be an excellent question. Also, by the way, worth noting that all of the technologies that Israel is currently using were rejected in the 1980s by one Joe Biden. Dan McLaughlin points this out. Joe Biden in 1986 told the National Press Club, quote, Star Wars is Ronald Reagan's missile defense system. Star Wars represents a fundamental assault on the concepts, alliances, and arms control agreements that have buttressed American security for several decades, and the president's continued adherence to it constitutes one of the most reckless and irresponsible acts in the history of modern statecraft. Man, Joe Biden is undefeated when it comes to being wrong. Just absolutely undefeated when it comes to being wrong. So, again, is this a miscalculation by Iran? Or is this merely a desperation play? That's the real question here. What exactly was the goal? What were they attempting to accomplish? Now, they had to demonstrate some sort of flex here, because if they just keep getting their ass handed to them on the international stage, presumably that creates some sort of pressure for them inside Iran. However, they're miscalculating here. I mean, a launch of this size against another sovereign state will be responded to in kind or worse. Avi Meir says, emerging from my bomb shelter here in Jerusalem, I stepped out briefly during the barrage and heard explosions reverberating all over the place. Iranian missiles were visible overhead. Now, there is an island, apparently. Eli David, who is a commentator in Israel, he points out that virtually all Iranian oil exports go through a tiny island in the Persian Gulf called Karga Island. It is quite possible that Israel is going to bomb that island, break the Iranian supply of oil. So, again, pretty amazing stuff. I've been talking with people in the IDF, in the IAF. They're not going to go quietly on this one. Like they're very tired of this. I keep checking my phone, by the way, because again, I have friends and family actually in Israel, and they have been telling me what's going on the ground over there. It is borderline miraculous. If you're a religious person, it's a miraculous thing that you can have 450 ballistic missiles fired at your country if you're Israeli, and somehow escape with zero casualties or one casualty, thanks to the amazing technology that Israel has unleashed here. Very little damage. Again, Iran's friends, I'm waiting for it. I'm just waiting for it. I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop. You know it's going to drop. You know Joe Biden's going to come forth and say, no, we need a ceasefire. Israel should take the win, take the win. But that is not going to happen. That is simply done. By the way, there's amazingly, there were weddings that were going on in Israel, and those weddings continued just at the bunker underground. Apparently, U.S. officials are stating that Israel will absolutely retaliate against Iran. By the way, this would be good for Biden. It would be good for America, period. It would be excellent for Israel to take out the single worst regime in the Middle East. That would be a very useful thing. And it is amazing, frankly, that the Biden administration has taken so long to get on board, if in fact they're already getting on board. Speaker Mike Johnson apparently has been briefed on the situation in Israel. So has Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, according to Jake Sherman. As I say, the narrative you're going to hear in the next couple of hours before Israel retaliates, which they will, is that Iran was being kind. So you have a journalist for Drop Site News saying, if this is true, it would suggest they did not target populated areas and the attack was for demonstration effect. And as Jake Sherman responded, or it demonstrates Iron Dome and David Sling worked. Missiles were raining over Tel Aviv. By the way, how much of a comfort would that be to you? Let's say that you're a resident of New York City or Miami or LA or Chicago, and you are told that you need to go into your basement and you need to wait until the missiles are done falling. And you look up in the air and you are seeing missiles being shot down. You're watching missiles fly over your city. If afterwards somebody was like, well, clearly they weren't aiming at you, it's all fine, no need for retaliation, what would you say to that? What exactly would your response be to any of this? So, as Naftali Bennett just said, Naftali Bennett, former prime minister, popular Israeli figure, he was responding to Antonio Guterres. He said, you've got to be kidding. You condemn the broadening? You just aren't able to blurt the simple words. I condemn the Islamic Republic of Iran, who just shot roughly 180 deadly ballistic missiles toward the citizens of Israel. Quit. True enough, the United Nations, the Mos Eisley of international politics. Truly bad. So meanwhile, Israel has been deterring Iranian resupply planes from reaching Lebanon. Earlier today, a cargo plane from the Islamic Republic of Iran was headed for Beirut. And the Israelis said, if you do that, we're going to shoot it down. It turned around and went back. Meanwhile, again, if this attack had been more successful, it would have led to a broader response. But I think Israel's done with that. The math is different now. I really do not think that Israel is going to sit around on this at this point. Now, again, Iranian Press TV claimed over 400 missiles were launched at Israel. You're hearing from Israeli sources 180 missiles. So that does raise the possibility that just as in the last round of attacks, only about half of the missiles actually fell where they were supposed to fall. Right? That half of them may have fallen on the way, fallen inside Iran, and all of the rest. Yeah, the idiots of the squad, we are waiting comment from them. But presumably they will have to wait until Israel responds to then declare that Israel is very, very bad. Bezalel Smotrich, leader of one of the right-wing parties, he says, I will now demand in the cabinet discussion that the family members of the abominable terrorists from Hebron, who carried out the heinous attacks in Jaffa, be deported to Gaza tonight, and their homes should be turned into ruins for them to see. Again, that is in response to a terror attack that happened in Jaffa, which is just south of Jerusalem. Just south of Tel Aviv, rather. That killed some 8 people. So, again, we are awaiting more word. We're supposed to have Douglas Murray on shortly. There's some other sources on the ground that we should probably reach out to. Sorry, I'm coordinating with my producers in real time. This is live coverage, of course. So, we are. It is amazing that we are now 2 hours into this, and Joe Biden is still asleep. Where is he precisely? Where is he? Now, meanwhile, Israel is still active in Lebanon. Jordan Schachtel, another excellent commentator, should go check out his Substack today. He says Israel is not going to take the win here. Iran has grossly miscalculated. These are unimpeded ballistic missiles raining down on civilian population centers. These events could very well result in the toppling of the Islamic Republic regime that rules Iran. Well, from his mouth to God's ears. Elon Musk added, having a weak president is dangerous to world security. That is correct. That is absolutely correct. A strong president, Donald Trump, would have already said at the very October 7th note never would have happened and all the rest. Katie Pavlich points out that just today, in the Biden-Harris administration, we have a dock strike not seen in 40 plus years that could cripple the economy, Katrina-level devastation in a number of southern U.S. states, war raging in a stalemate between Russia and Ukraine, and now hundreds of missile launches from Iran. Yeah, but at least Joe Biden is getting his tan on over at Rehoboth Beach. That's the really important thing. I mean, we need to keep that in mind. Again, we are continuing to show you on a loop some of the footage that we have seen. It's pretty amazing footage. There are, by the way, some new election polls out in the meantime. Arizona, Trump is up 1. Nevada, Trump is up 1. North Carolina, Trump is up 1. We are still waiting to see what Israel's retaliatory response is going to be at this point. We are waiting word. The IDF is supposed to give an update in the very, very near future. Again, you're watching TV being made in real time, folks, because, again, I'm actually texting prospective guests to talk about what's going on right now, seeing if we can get some voices from on the ground over there. Again, for those who are just joining late, Iran did launch a barrage missile. We've heard a bunch of different numbers. And again, we'll update you as new numbers come in. The numbers from Jaffa have been apparently 6 dead, 6 Israelis dead, 2 assailants shot and killed as well. The Israeli military has said that for the moment, the Iranian attack is over. Israel is estimating 180 missiles. The Iranians had actually announced 400 missiles. Israel has already signaled that they will retaliate. Spokesperson Daniel Hagari said this attack will have consequences. We have plans. We will operate at the place and time we decide. Now, again, that should scare the hell out of the Iranians, considering that Israel has such extraordinary intelligence penetration into Iran. It may not happen tonight, may not happen immediately, and it may be that one day Ayatollah Khamenei decides to light up his vibrator and explodes. That is a possibility. You never know. Middle East is a strange place. Meanwhile, again, President Trump has put out a statement at this time saying the world is on fire and spiraling out of control. We have no leadership, no one running the country. We have a non-existent president in Joe Biden, a completely absent Vice President Kamala Harris, who is too busy fundraising in San Francisco, a city in which she and Gavin Newsom totally destroyed, staging fake photo ops. No one is in charge. It's not even clear who is more confused, Biden or Kamala. Neither has any idea what exactly is going on. Let's see. I am going to try to... Producers, I have a guest for us. And you're watching the sausage being made. This is what happens when you go live. So, producer Justin, you have just been sent a contact information. So let's see if we can grab Amit Segal. Again, President Trump's statement goes on, quote, "When I was president, Iran was in total check. They were starved for cash, fully contained, desperate to make a deal. Kamala flooded them with American cash. Ever since, they've been exporting terror all over and unraveling the Middle East." Again, I think it's important to point out that Joe Biden this week, yesterday, was telling the Israelis to back down. Like, just moments ago. In fact, he said we need a ceasefire. There's a comment that are not all there president made literally yesterday. He was obviously very ticked at the Israelis for having the temerity to defend themselves. He had suggested also, by the way, that Israeli strikes on Yemen were actually dock worker strikes because he doesn't know what's going on a regular basis. A journalist asked him, Israel may now launch a limited ground operation in Lebanese territory. Are you aware of this? Are you comfortable with their plans? And Biden replied, this is a direct quote, "I'm more aware of that than you think. I'm comfortable with them stopping. We need a ceasefire now." That is not exactly the way that it works over there. Again, but President Biden is a very, very foolish man. No shock there. Now, in the meantime, what Israel has uncovered in Lebanon in the current operation is truly stunning. According to Open Source Intel, which is an account on Twitter, more than 70 special operations have taken place over recent months, with IDF forces spending some 200 nights inside enemy territory in southern Lebanon. Some operations lasted 2 to 3 consecutive days within southern Lebanon. Numerous IDF special units were involved in those missions. During the operations, forces entered Hezbollah tunnels, destroyed weapons on site, rigged explosives, and brought back weapons and intelligence documents to Israel. In 2 operations over the past few months, IDF forces sustained casualties, one due to an explosion of their own rigged explosives and another from the detonation of an old unexploded bomb left in the area. Hezbollah did not detect the operations. No encounters or battles occurred with the terrorists. The missions were carried out within 2 to 3 kilometers of the Israeli border in the surrounding village zone. That, of course, is one of the reasons why you didn't see a broader Hezbollah attack from southern Lebanon in the aftermath of the killing of Hassan Nasrallah, or in the aftermath of Operation Grim Beeper. Now, Kamala Harris is nowhere to be found on all this, by the way. A massive hurricane, nowhere to be found. Massive Iranian attack on Israel, nowhere to be found. Huge, huge strike on the ports, nowhere to be found. Nowhere to be found. Meanwhile, again, the IDF is not going to stop at this point. They're not. They have no interest in stopping. Ian Bremmer was wrong a few minutes ago. He's right on this one. He says, the last month has been a repeated demonstration of Israeli military dominance in the region. Offense and defense, intelligence and technology. Iran and proxy have no effective way to reestablish deterrence. Iranians are deeply concerned about the Americans joining the war. Well, as far as that last point, whether the Americans join the war or not, it is difficult to see exactly how that is going to impact things. Again, we are awaiting a couple of guests. We're still awaiting word from Douglas Murray. He should be joining us sometime in the near future to discuss what is going on the ground over there. Also try and get in touch with some Israeli journalists to get in touch with them as well. And if I pause while I'm talking, once again, it's because I'm trying to figure out live exactly how to contact some of the prospective guests. Here again is the map of what these rocket strikes looked like in Israel. These missile strikes all over Israel. You can see basically the Negev, what you're looking at here, if you're not familiar with the map of Israel, you can see that the largely unpopulated region in the south, that'd be the Negev desert. Not a lot there. It's, that particular area is rather unpopulated. Every other part of the state of Israel, except for the north, which of course was under sort of Hezbollah rocket fire, that area was basically left alone, but that's because they figured that Hezbollah was going to handle it, effectively speaking. Let's see. Once again, the latest situation is that we are awaiting word from the Israelis on what's going to happen next. We have no word from Joe Biden on what's going to happen next. We have no word from anybody on what's going to happen next, except that the world is waiting with bated breath to see what Israel will do next, because presumably Israel had prepared for just this sort of eventuality. Yeah, what the past couple of months have shown, particularly, is that October 7th was an outlier. October 7th was not a rejiggering of power in the region. October 7th was a signal awful failure by Israeli intelligence and the IDF, and it did not change the balance of power in any way in the Middle East. Israel is now changing the balance of power in the aftermath of October 7th. As I've mentioned before, when you look at the amount of damage that Israel has done to its enemies in the aftermath of October 7th, it is very much like what the United States did after 9/11 or after Pearl Harbor. First world nations are sometimes surprised by third world barbarians. It turns out that what happens next is indicative of what happens when a first world nation goes directly at a third world group of barbarians. Senator John Fetterman, who again is the great shock of our political age, he was perceived by me and others as a far leftist on virtually every issue when he was running for Senate in Pennsylvania. He has put out a tweet, quote, "Any move Iran makes against Israel, my voice and vote follows Israel to ensure they have whatever resources they need, whether that's military, financial, or intelligence, to prevail over terror." Man, John Fetterman, amazing. Truly amazing. It's kind of incredible, frankly, how wrong you can be about somebody like John Fetterman. Now, I am talking with friends, in real time in Israel. They are all fine. Thank you for asking. I see people who are commenting and asking about it. And they are all so far good. Nobody has been hurt in Israel except for in this awful shooting in Jaffa, which undoubtedly was coordinated with the Iranian government. The timing was too close for it not to have been coordinated with the Iranian government. Again, the video we have footage of people who are literally picking up these rockets. I mean, these are large weapons, folks. This is not small, cheap $50 rockets that were shot at the state of Israel from Hezbollah territory or from the Gaza Strip. It's something very, very different. Again, it's look at the size of this rocket. Now they're cheering, presumably. I'm not sure why they're cheering. Are they cheering that the rocket fell because it's in their area? Kind of weird. They seem excited about the rocket, but this is a strange area of the world. Lindsey Graham has also put out a tweet at this point. Senator Graham, he says, there's a moment of choosing for the free world regarding Iran. The Ayatollah and the Iranian regime are religious Nazis who want to destroy the state of Israel. Their words, not mine. They want to purify Islam and attack the United States again. Their words, not mine. This missile attack against Israel should be the breaking point. I'd urge the Biden administration to coordinate an overwhelming response with Israel, starting with Iran's ability to refine oil. Those oil refineries need to be hit and hit hard because that is the source of cash for the regime to perpetrate their terror. My prayers are with the people of Israel. May God continue to bless Israel. Again, there are people who are suggesting that Israel, that the American troops in the region are in too vulnerable a position for this sort of thing. Again, I don't think the United States is going to actively coordinate a response with Israel. I think this is going to be Israel on its own doing what it wants to do. In just a moment, we're going to be joined by Amit Segal. He is a reporter for Channel 12 in Israel. Again, I recommend highly that people check out his Telegram. He has an English Telegram as well as a Hebrew Telegram that can get translated into English. He's going to be joining us right now. Here he is. Do we have Amit?
Yeah. Hi, Ben.
Hey, how are you? So it seems like you guys have been having a fun night over there. Why don't you give me the update on the ground from the latest you're hearing?
So what we see now from here, from Israel, is that almost 200 ballistic missiles have been fired from Iran to Israel. None of them caused any serious damage. 95% of the missiles, give or take, I think more than 95% were actually fell or got by our air defense systems. And the dramatic photos and videos that you actually see is just the remains of the missiles, but no injuries, no casualties. Thanks God and the Israeli Defense Forces.
So, I mean, there's been a lot of talk in the Western press. I'm sure you're going to see some from the Biden administration suggesting that Iran had pre-coordinated this with the West, that they had basically given big warning, that they didn't mean to kill anybody. This was basically their way of trying to reestablish deterrence with Israel after Israel has absolutely devastated Hezbollah in southern Lebanon and in Lebanon more generally, that this somehow should forestall an Israeli response. What are you hearing in terms of an Israeli response to this Iranian attack? What do you make of the argument that Iran wasn't really attempting to hurt anybody? It was just sort of a fireworks show.
No. It's the most expensive and dramatic firework in the Middle East history. What they really tried to do is to actually attack and destroy 3 different Air Force bases in Nevatim, Ramat David, and Hatzerim, and the Mossad headquarters in Glilot, 5 minutes from Tel Aviv. So they actually tried to cause a huge damage. And therefore, I think the response would be, should be, and must be the most dramatic attack made by the Israeli Air Force on Iran's soil. And I'll explain. In the past, Israel was frustrated because for many, many years it was attacked. It has been attacked by the arms of the octopus. But the octopus itself never suffered from a direct Israeli hit. There were mysterious incidents, but Israel has never taken any responsibility. Now it changed. And 3 minutes ago, the IDF spokesperson said, Ben, and I never heard him speaking like this, that the Israeli Air Force will act all over the Middle East this night. And I think it's quite clear which part of the Middle East he means.
So, I mean, there's been a lot of discussion about what exactly that strategy looks like. Obviously, Iran's two major assets are its nuclear facilities and its oil refineries. There's been a lot of talk about the possibility of Israel either bombing the oil fields, bombing the oil refineries, essentially throttling the Iranian economy in response to this, or possibly going in directly after the Iranian nuclear facilities. That, of course, has been the talk of Israel for the better part of 2 decades at this point. It seems like there's not going to be a better opportunity for Israel to actually destroy the Iranian nuclear facilities if they have the capacity to do so. And obviously, tonight goes very differently for Israel if there's a nuclear warhead on one of those missiles.
Exactly. So, question is, if Israel has the ability to attack Iran's nuclear program, I doubt it, and I don't think this is the case for tonight. But I do think it's going to be something focused on Iran's economy, aka the fossil fuel, etc. And therefore, I think that Iran misunderstood Israel exactly the way Nasrallah, Iran's puppet, misunderstood Israel. He was sure Israel will never attack and will never invade Lebanon and will never kill him, and it happened. And I think the Iranian regime, as we see from their comments tonight, they think this is the revenge for assassinating Nasrallah, Hania, and the rest of the terrorist leaders. But they don't understand that Israel will and must retaliate. So once again, they don't understand how Israel has changed dramatically since October 7th, 2023.
When you look at the possibility of further action, obviously Israel has tremendous intelligence penetration inside Iran as well. There's a reason that Ayatollah Khamenei went into hiding after the killing of Hassan Nasrallah. There are a lot of dissidents on the ground in Iran. There are a lot of intelligence assets that Israel's been able to work up inside Iran. The funniest story of the week was ex-president Mahmoud Ahmadinejad saying that there was actually an anti-Mossad branch that was created inside the IRGC, and it turns out that the head of that unit, according to him, was actually a member of Mossad, which is inherently hilarious. I mean, the Iranian regime, the problem obviously that faces Israel is that while the Iranian regime is vulnerable to a wide variety of attacks, from the oil fields to the taking out of Iranian nuclear scientists and upper level members of the Iranian regime, is there the possibility, there's been kind of loose talk about the possibility of regime change there. It's difficult to see regime change without any sort of internal uprising led by somebody inside IRGC, for example.
No, but I think first of all, we don't know. No one is foreseen the collapse of the Soviet Union at the end of the 80s. But what we know is that this is a corrupt administration, very weak in terms of economy. And we see now the pilots in Lebanon. Israel attacked Nasrallah and Hezbollah, and we see the uprising in Lebanon as it happens. So maybe, perhaps it might happen not in tiny Lebanon, but in bigger Iran. But for sure, suffering a huge economic damage due to the desire of the Iranian regime to attack Israel without any reason. I mean, there is no reason for this conflict. When I was a child, there were still flights from Tel Aviv to Tehran, too many years ago. So there's no reason for it, and at least half of the Iranian population doesn't see any point for such a war that is going to be a full-scale war soon.
There is a developing incident apparently in the Gaza Strip. There's a report right now, Amit, that a mob, about 80 Gazans, some of them armed, are trying to overwhelm IDF forces in the Netzarim access. It looks as though there are a bunch of coordinated kind of local terror attacks, Iranian proxy groups. It would be surprising, for example, if the attack in Jaffa tonight was not coordinated with the Iranian government. That apparently was 2 terrorists who came from Hebron, which is in the West Bank. Those are people who are under Palestinian rule. What is Israel's response to that? Do you think that these are coordinated with the Iranian regime?
I think it's more disturbing. I think they don't have to coordinate killing Jews. I think that the 2 murderers that came to the light train, to the tram in Jaffa and killed 6 Jews and 6 Israelis, they did it because they want to kill as many Jews as they can. And that's the reason why Gazans celebrated tonight the pictures in Tel Aviv of the missiles fired at Israel. By the way, the most amazing fact from tonight is that the only victim of the Iranian attack is a Gazan Palestinian who fled to Jericho, the Palestinian city of Jericho. So the only victim of the Iranian regime is someone who fled from Gaza because of the results of the Iranian terror fueling.
So when you look, meanwhile, at the action that Israel has taken in Lebanon, Israel is reestablishing not only its deterrence, it's demonstrating the full weight of its might in the aftermath of October 7th. You know, watching very closely what was happening in Israel in the era after October 7th, there's a lot of doubt worldwide, particularly in the region, but also even within Israel, about the capacity of the intelligence, why did October 7th happen, the capacity of the IDF, all sorts of questions being asked about why the response on October 7th wasn't better, why weren't things going better in the Gaza Strip. Now, almost a year out, what we can see is that the performance of the IDF and the IAF has been absolutely astonishing. The operation in the Gaza Strip has cost too many young people their lives. It's cost too many young people their limbs. But the total number of Israeli dead in the Gaza Strip right now, numbers in the relatively low hundreds. The total number of Palestinian terrorists who have been killed by the Israelis, numbers in the well over 20,000 range. Meanwhile, in the course of the last 2.5 weeks, Israel has basically eviscerated the entire upper echelon of Hezbollah. They've taken out virtually all, apparently, of their long-range munitions, and they are currently clearing southern Lebanon, which is something that we're now finding out they were doing for the past year. They were doing small-scale operations into southern Lebanon in an attempt to sort of set up the preliminaries for the operation that's taking place right now. Can you speak to Israel's position in the Middle East right now, during and after all this action?
On October 7th, 2024, Israel was in its weakest point ever, I think. The deterrence, this invisible thing that you can't see it, but you can smell it, was hindered by the fact that the weakest enemy of Israel, Hamas, massacred 1,200 Israelis, broke the entire Israeli army for a day, which is amazing. And then Hezbollah started firing, and the Houthis from Yemen and Iran. I think that was on October 7th, 2023. On October 1st, 2024, Israel's deterrence, I think, has recovered dramatically due to the fact that it actually cut off Hamas's lifeline, destroyed Hamas as a terror army, and in 2 weeks took from Hezbollah the abilities that were built for 20 years, that have been built for 20 years. And I think the whole world sees it. And I would like to offer an explanation, because maybe your audience might wonder, if Israel's deterrence is stronger than ever, how come Iran tried to attack Israel tonight? And the answer is that here's the proof. For the first time in its history, in 2024, Iran had to attack Israel in itself, without hiding behind its proxies. So because we broke one proxy and we are on our way to broke yet another proxy, and we're attacking the Houthis in Yemen, which is the third proxy, it means necessarily that they have to act. People all over the Middle East wondered over the last few days, Israel killed Nasrallah, Israel destroyed Hamas, and you in Iran do nothing? So perhaps you are not as strong as you thought. And I think it shows something which is not very Persian. They are very well known for their patience. And all of a sudden, I don't know, they look to me like Israelis or Americans.
Well, that's Amit Segal. Go check out all of his work over at Channel 12 and also on his Twitter feed and also on his Telegram. I've recommended everybody check out your Telegram, which is the best source for information in the Middle East. Amit, really appreciate the time. Stay safe out there.
Thank you so much.
Well, now joining us on the line is my friend Douglas Murray. Douglas, of course, is the #1 best-selling author of 7 books, including The War on the West. He also writes, of course, for The Spectator, The New York Post, The Sun, The Free Press. Douglas, where are you right now?
I'm now in New York.
So let's talk about what's going on in Israel. Obviously, you've spent large swaths of the last year in Israel covering the conflict on the ground in Gaza. What we watched tonight was yet another mass Iranian assault on Israel. Israel said about 180 missiles were fired at Israel. Iran had earlier claimed about 400, which wouldn't be shocking if a bunch of those missiles fell inside Iran, since they are wildly incompetent, apparently, at everything. What do you make of the situation?
Well, I think, as your previous caller was saying, the most important thing is that as we come up to the first anniversary of October 7th, Israel's deterrent capability in the region has been reestablished. It has shown itself to be able to reach wherever it wants to reach, to a degree that even its sort of greatest admirers and indeed its greatest enemies didn't expect it to be capable of. The destruction of the entire leadership of Hezbollah, which was completed last Friday morning when Benjamin Netanyahu spoke of the UN, where I was in attendance as well, was a truly astonishing final act of that. Hezbollah's top levels of command have all been killed. Second level of command have all been killed. The lower levels have all been killed. They're already by last week, half of their munitions were destroyed. That's going to be much more in the days ahead as the land attack on Hezbollah continues. It's astonishing, an astonishing success. It is, as I say, just shortly before the anniversary of the 7th of October, demonstration that Israel has not just deterred her enemies, but is in the process of destroying them. And there's one other very important thing that should be said about this, of course. As you know, Ben, and many of your listeners will know, the people who have been killed, the senior Hezbollah commanders who've been killed in recent weeks, include the people who killed 241 American Marines in the Beirut barracks bombing in 1983. Their deaths were never avenged by America. America put out bounties for them, but nothing was done to find these people. It took the IDF decades later to finally get revenge and get the people who killed American servicemen in the line of duty in Beirut in 1983. And to my mind, this points to something very important that Benjamin Netanyahu said when speaking in Congress in front of the joint sessions in July, where he said, "Our fight is your fight, and our victory will be your victory." And I think this is a reminder of that. Israel's current and ongoing victories are also America's victories.
Yeah, and Douglas, one of the most astonishing things about this conflict has been the bizarre desire by the Biden administration to basically hold the leash on Israel, tell them they shouldn't go into Rafah and finish off Hamas, tell Israel it should take the victory. The last time that Iran shot a wide barrage of missiles at Israel, I'm fully expecting that you will hear some sort of language like that coming out of the Biden administration shortly. So far, they've been silent. Perhaps they're waiting for Israel to take the action and then say the thing. Joe Biden keeps repeating the word ceasefire as though it's the word Beetlejuice, and suddenly Beetlejuice is going to appear. If he says ceasefire enough times, then magically everything will heal in the Middle East and he can go back to sleep in Rehoboth Beach. But the simple fact of the matter is that what Israel is doing through its massive escalation against Hezbollah is actually making the region significantly more peaceful for the foreseeable future. The possibility of reopening the Abraham Accords to Saudi Arabia, the possibility of Lebanon itself actually being turned into something livable, the possibility even of something as dramatic as an Iranian revolution. These sorts of things become possible when Western powers stand up for themselves.
Yes, and everyone had hoped that the Americans would be among the most important allies, would be alongside Israel all the way in this. And as you mentioned, they haven't been. We've had the situation now for a year, in which, for instance, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have said you're allowed to retaliate, but not too much. We had, of course, Kamala Harris saying the Israelis shouldn't go into the Hamas stronghold of Rafah, because if you remember, she said she'd studied the maps, something which I'm sure no IDF colonel has ever done. And then we have this call for a ceasefire now, and it's flat out wrong. When you are winning, you have to push for total victory. And that's what the Israelis, I hope, are doing at the moment, what they should be doing. The Iranian ballistics being hurled at Israel as we speak are a demonstration, as we just heard, of Iranian revolutionary government weakness. All of their proxies have now been destroyed. Their proxies of Hezbollah totally destroyed. Their proxy in Yemen almost totally destroyed. The proxy in Hamas almost totally destroyed. This means that Iran, the Iranian revolutionary government, which is holding that country hostage, should now be in the sights of every country that values freedom. And I've just add one other thing to that, which is, we have heard routinely in the last year from Biden and others, they always do the same thing. Ceasefire, important not to escalate, and much more. Flat out wrong. You don't have a ceasefire when you're winning. You don't have a ceasefire when your enemies are on their knees. You do not have a ceasefire when your enemies are on the brink of total destruction. It is not the case that peace is always the answer. And I would cite the book of Ecclesiastes, But at a very, very important moment, there is a time for all things upon the earth. There is a time for war and a time for peace. This is a time for war, and it should be a war to annihilate the enemies of Israel and the United States. And I, at any rate, hope that war can end.
Yeah, Douglas, I think that final point is the one that I think is the big one. What Israel is doing right now is a complete rejiggering of the Western way of war back to what the Western way of war used to be decades ago, which is actually pursuing victory. It's been a very long time since anyone in the West actually even mentioned the word victory. Netanyahu has said over and over and over, we will win. The Israeli public is behind him in his attempts to win so that they don't have to fight this again tomorrow. If the West would take the lead from that, the world would be a much better place.
Absolutely, and amen to that.
Well, that's Douglas Murray. Go check out all of his work, of course, over at Douglas K. Murray on Twitter. And, of course, check him out at the New York Post, the Sun. Check him out at the Free Press. And also check out, of course, his great book, The War on the West. Douglas, thanks so much for taking the time. Really appreciate it.
It's a great pleasure. Thank you.
So, meanwhile, the U.S. is holding a press conference. The White House is holding a press conference right now. Apparently, according to the press conference, the U.S. did help shoot down some of the missiles via the Navy. So that is a good thing. And it's good that the United States is shooting down missiles from a terror power aimed at an ally. That is a very good thing. And we'll wait further news on that. So just to recap what we know at this point, about 6 p.m. tonight, Iran began firing hundreds of ballistic missiles at the state of Israel. The state of Israel estimates that's 180 ballistic missiles. Iran apparently has suggested up to 400 ballistic missiles. That was 6 p.m. local time in Israel. The footage was astonishing. You can see the footage in the 2-box here, falling all over the state of Israel. The entire map of the state of Israel was covered in red alerts. I was getting calls. I was getting WhatsApps from all my friends in Israel talking about having to run to the shelters, take their kids into the shelters. Iran announced this was in retaliation for the death of Hassan Nasrallah, the terror head of Hezbollah. That is the Iranian proxy arm in Lebanon. Israel has thoroughly eviscerated Hezbollah. They've taken out Hassan Nasrallah. They've taken out nearly the entire upper echelon of Hezbollah. They've moved into southern Lebanon. It turns out they've been performing extraordinary operations in southern Lebanon for the last year to empty out terror capacity in southern Lebanon. And now they're moving full scale into southern Lebanon, presumably over the course of the next few days, to rid it once and for all of Hezbollah presence. Iran, in an attempt to demonstrate that they have some level of a credible force left in the Middle East, fired this very large barrage of ballistic missiles at Israel. Because of Israel's defense capacity, because of its allies, 0 people have died. The only person who was killed in all of this, one person has died, not 0. One person died. The one person who was killed in all of this was a Gazan refugee in the West Bank city of Jericho. So the Iranians were aiming at the Jews, and they hit a Gazan Palestinian. The entire map, again, of Israel lit up red. That includes the West Bank, in which 2 million Arabs live. And, of course, there are 2 million Arabs who live inside the state of Israel as well. Once again, when it comes to Iran, they do not care one fig about their supposed Palestinian allies. All they care about is using those Palestinian allies as a weapon against the state of Israel. Israel, at this hour, has announced that there will be a massive retaliation. This will not go unchallenged, unlike the first time back in April when the Biden administration talked Israel out of a harsher action and Israel fired a piece of high-tech ordnance that was designed to deter Iran. This time, Israel has said they are going to go after whatever they need to go after. Presumably, they'll mean going after the oil refineries in Iran or after nuclear facilities in Iran, or perhaps using intelligence capabilities to do something unexpected, the way that they used Operation Grim Beeper in Lebanon to defenestrate half of the Hezbollah upper echelon in Lebanon, and then used the radios to blow up the other half. So what we are watching right now is Israel flex muscle. Iran is desperate. That's the reason they had to get invested in this thing directly. The reason they have now fired twice massive missile barrages directly at the state of Israel is because their proxies are being taken completely off the board. Hamas is losing in the Gaza Strip. They've effectively lost. They are now a low-level counterinsurgency. 23 out of 24 Hamas battalions in the Gaza Strip after October 7th have been completely wiped out and destroyed. Hezbollah, which was the gravest threat, the biggest, most well-armed terror group in the region, has now been thoroughly handled. Hezbollah will continue to be degraded en masse by the Israelis. Tens of thousands of members of Hezbollah have been fleeing across the Lebanese-Syrian border to get away from Israeli fire. And Iran, feeling that it was losing grip on all of these proxies, had to fire directly. course, the Houthis, another Iranian proxy group, had fired a cruise missile at Israel a little bit earlier this week, and Israel proceeded to blow up 2 ports that the Houthis were in control of. So Israel right now is saying to the entire Middle East that they are not going to be made subject to the whims of evil terrorist groups backed by Iran, and they are now making clear, and I'm sure they will make clear in coming hours and coming days, that they are perfectly willing to make clear to the Iranians that if they want it, they're going to get it. FAFO. Apparently, Ayatollah Khamenei is once again in hiding. He is correctly afraid that Israel will assassinate him the way that Israel assassinated Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran, the way that Israel assassinated Hassan Nasrallah in Beirut. All of this missile fire was coincident with a large-scale shooting attack in the Israeli city of Jaffa that is located just south of Tel Aviv. 6 people killed on the street, plus the 2 terrorists. There was also an attempt in the so-called Netzarim corridor, which is an area of central Gaza, by some 80 terrorists to storm in an IDF position. The threat was neutralized, and no Israelis were hurt there. So what we are watching again is the Iranians gasp against the dying of the light. They can see that they are no longer in control of events in the Middle East. For too long, their tentacles have surrounded Israel, have attempted to strangle Israel. Israel has broken each one of those tentacles in turn. And now the head of the octopus is trying to strike at Israel, and Israel is going to strike the head of the octopus back. President Trump, of course, has issued a statement pointing out that none of this would have happened were he the president of the United States. Right now, of course, he is exactly correct about that. His statement read, "The world is on fire and spiraling out of control. We have no leadership, no one running the country. We have a non-existent president in Joe Biden, a completely absent Vice President Kamala Harris, who is too busy fundraising in San Francisco, a city which she and Gavin Newsom totally destroyed, staging fake photo ops. No one's in charge. It's not even clear who's more confused, Biden or Kamala. Neither has any idea what is even going on. When I was president, Iran was in total check. They were starved for cash, fully contained, and desperate to make a deal. Kamala flooded them with American cash. Ever since, they've been exporting terror all over, unraveling the Middle East. Under President Trump, we had no war in the Middle East, no war in Europe, harmony in Asia, no inflation, no Afghanistan catastrophe. Instead, we had peace. Now, war or the threat of war is raging everywhere. The 2 incompetents running this country are leading us to the brink of World War III. You wouldn't trust Joe or Kamala to run a lemonade stand, let alone the free world," says Donald Trump. It's no surprise Iran desperately wants Kamala Harris to be president because they know as long as she is in power, they can take advantage of America. That is why they've tried to target me. If I was in charge, October 7th never would have happened. Russia-Ukraine never happens. Afghanistan botched withdrawal never happens. Inflation never happens. If I win, we'll have peace in the world again. If Kamala gets 4 more years, the world goes up in smoke. He is totally correct about that, obviously. And that should be what J.D. Vance says in the vice presidential debate tonight. Again, we do these live updates in real time because of our subscribers, our supporters. We really appreciate it. If you subscribe, you make it possible for us to bring you live breaking news updates like this. If you don't subscribe, please make sure to head over to dailywire.com right now. Get 47% off your subscription with code FIGHT. Please, again, subscribe. It helps us bring the news to you, bring you breaking news in real time the way that we are doing right now. Make sure that you also tune in tonight for our vice presidential debate coverage. It's a very, very busy day over here at Daily Wire. Again, make sure, head on over to subscribe, dailywire.com, and use code FIGHT for 47% off your annual membership. We'll see you in just a little bit.